fabled heat, where magic meets desire. Subscribe to ignite the fantasy.
The first time I saw him, Commander Kael aimed his pulse rifle at my chest, the green reticle hovering like a cold kiss above my sternum. He didn't wobble, his aim was deliberate, a surgeon's precision turned lethal. I'd read the dossiers, Iron Wolf of the Celestial Guard, the man who crushed rebellions on the rim worlds with a single thought. None of those cold reports prepared me for the way his storm-dark hair caught the flickering emergency lights, turning each strand into liquid shadow that seemed to move of its own accord. His steel-gray eyes locked onto me, not with lust but with a calculating hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if I were a specimen under a microscope, his gaze dissecting every secret I kept hidden. A low, guttural growl escaped his lips as he spat, Deathworlder, the word reverberating through my helmet, a curse that vibrated against my bone. The disdain in his voice was palpable, a weight pressing on my chest, yet beneath it lay a current of something else, an electric pull I could not deny. I felt the heat of his breath on my cheek, the faint scent of ozone and metal mingling with the faint perfume of his skin. My own pulse hammered in my ears, a rhythm that matched the frantic thrum of the station's alarms. In that suspended moment I realized the danger was not just external, it was the magnetic tension between us, a forbidden spark that could ignite a war or a love that defied the stars. "You're a threat," he said, voice low, eyes never leaving mine, and yet he let the sentence hang, the unspoken promise heavier than any weapon. I swallowed, tasting iron on my tongue, and whispered back, "Then make me your enemy, Kael, and watch how quickly I become your obsession." The air crackled, the station trembled, and for a heartbeat, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see whether our kiss would be salvation or ruin. The corridors of the orbital citadel were a maze of steel and humming conduits, each step echoing like a drumbeat in a war march. I had been sent here under the pretense of delivering a data core that could turn the tide against the Syndicate, but the truth was far more personal. My name is Lyra Ardent, a former smuggler turned intelligence operative, and I carried a secret that could topple the fragile peace between the core worlds and the fringe colonies. When I first boarded the Citadel, the docking bay smelled of burnt fuel and recycled air. The metallic clang of cargo crates being shifted reverberated through the hull, and the distant hum of the reactor reminded me that this floating fortress was a living beast, breathing fire and steel. I slipped through the shadows, my boots silent on the grated floor, my mind replaying the briefing I had received from Director Selene. "Lyra, you know why this is critical," Selene had said, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. "If Kael discovers the core before we do, the Guard will use it to tighten the noose around the outer sectors. We need you to get it to the Resistance on Vesper 9. I had nodded, but the weight of the data core in my satchel felt like a stone in my gut. It pulsed faintly, a soft blue glow that seemed to sync with my own heartbeat. I could feel the temptation to open it, to see the schematics that could end thousands of lives, but I knew better than to trust curiosity in a place where every wall had ears. The Citadel's central hub was a cathedral of light where the emergency lights flickered in a staccato rhythm, casting long shadows that danced across the polished floors. It was there, beneath a vaulted arch, that I first saw Kael. He stood like a statue, his rifle trained on me, the green reticle a promise of death. My mind raced. I had heard stories of his ruthlessness, of how he had single-handedly quelled the uprising on Corin Prime, leaving the city in ruins. Yet as I stared into his eyes, I sensed something else, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps, or a recognition of a kindred spirit. "You know why I'm here," he said, his voice low, each syllable a blade. I swallowed, feeling the taste of copper on my tongue. "I'm here to deliver a package, nothing more." He lowered his rifle slightly, the reticle still hovering, a silent accusation. "And what makes you think I'll let you walk away with it?" A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, though it was more a challenge than a gesture of amusement. "Because you're not the only one who knows how to read a man's intent." He tilted his head, the storm-dark hair catching the light, each strand moving like a living thing. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow to the space between us, the hum of the station fading into a low, distant thrum. "You're bold," he murmured, almost admiringly. "I like that." The words hung in the air, and I felt a strange warmth spreading through my chest, a sensation that was part fear, part exhilaration. I could have turned and fled, but the pull of his gaze was like gravity, inexorable. Bold enough to risk everything, I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. Or perhaps foolish enough to think I can outwit a commander. He chuckled, a sound that resonated deep in his chest, reverberating against the metal walls. Foolishness can be a virtue when it leads to unexpected outcomes. The alarms blared louder, red lights flashing in a frantic rhythm. The Citadel's security drones swarmed the corridor, their lenses scanning for any sign of breach. I could feel the tension coiling like a spring, ready to snap. "We have a choice," Kael said, his tone shifting to something softer, almost intimate. "We can fight, or we can." He let the sentence trail off, his eyes searching mine for a hint of what I might be willing to sacrifice. My mind flashed back to the night on Vesper 9 when I had first met Selene. The sky had been a tapestry of violet and amber, the wind carrying the scent of ionized sand. Selene had placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice a whisper against the roar of the storm. "You're the only one who can get this through, Lyra, not because you're the best, but because you understand the cost of losing everything." I thought of the children on the outer colonies, their faces lit by the glow of makeshift lanterns, their futures hanging on a fragile thread. I thought of the men and women who had given their lives for a cause they barely understood. And I thought of Kael, a man whose reputation was built on iron and fear, yet whose eyes now held something softer, something that made me wonder if he, too, carried a hidden burden. "What do you want, Kael?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He lowered his rifle completely, the green reticle disappearing into the darkness. He stepped closer, the scent of ozone intensifying as his breath brushed my cheek. "I want to know if the stories are true," he said, his voice barely audible. "If the woman who can slip through the shadows is as relentless as they say." A laugh escaped me, light and unexpected. "And you, are you as relentless as the legends claim?" He smiled, a rare, genuine curve of his lips that softened the hard lines of his face. "Perhaps, or perhaps I'm just tired of being a weapon." The words struck me like a sudden gust of wind, scattering the ash of my doubts. In that moment, I realized that beneath the armor, beneath the titles, we were both just people trying to survive in a universe that demanded more than we could give. "Then let's make a pact," I said, feeling the weight of the data core shift against my side. "You let me pass, and I'll give you something you can't buy with any amount of power." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his steel-gray eyes. "And what would that be?" I reached into my satchel, feeling the cool metal of a small, intricately carved crystal. It pulsed with a faint, inner light, a relic from my home world, a piece of the ancient star forge that had once powered entire cities. "This is a fragment of the star forge," I whispered, holding it up so the light danced across his face. "It can amplify any energy source, even a pulse rifle. In the right hands, it could turn the tide of any war." His gaze softened, the calculating hunger giving way to something like awe. "You're offering me a weapon." I shook my head. "A choice." He took a step back, the green reticle of his rifle now a distant memory. The alarms continued to wail, but the sound seemed to fade as we stood there, two strangers bound by a fragile thread of possibility. "You have my word," Kael said, his voice steady. "I will not pursue you unless you ask me to." I felt a surge of relief, followed quickly by a surge of something else, anticipation. "Then we both have something to gain," I replied, slipping the crystal into his palm, "and perhaps something to lose." He turned, his shoulders squared, the weight of his command evident in every movement. As he walked away, I could feel the pull of his presence lingering, a magnetic field that tugged at my very soul. The days that followed were a blur of covert meetings, whispered codes, and stolen moments in the dim corridors of the Citadel. I learned that Kael was not just a commander. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of his past. He spoke of his mother, a healer from the moon colony of Selene, who had taught him the value of compassion before the war stripped him of everything. One night, after a particularly brutal skirmish with the Syndicate's drones, we found ourselves alone in the observation deck, the stars outside a tapestry of glittering possibilities. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to live without war?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the soft hum of the station's life support. He stared out at the void, his profile illuminated by the distant suns. "Every day," he admitted, his tone raw and honest, "but the universe has a way of reminding us that peace is a fragile illusion." I turned to face him, the crystal still warm in his palm. Maybe we can create our own illusion, I said, daring to hope. He turned, his eyes meeting mine, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The green reticle of his rifle was gone, replaced by a look of vulnerability that I had never seen before. Perhaps, he whispered, his voice trembling with something I could only describe as longing, perhaps we can be more than the roles the galaxy has forced upon us. The station shuddered as a distant explosion rippled through the outer hull, a reminder that danger was never far. Yet in that moment, the danger felt distant, as if we were suspended in a bubble of our own making. When the time came to deliver the data core to the Resistance, I stood on the platform of the cargo bay, the core humming against my chest like a living heart. Kael approached, his presence a steadying force amidst the chaos. "You're going to succeed," he said, his voice low, the words a promise and a challenge. I looked at him, seeing not the commander, but the man who had shared a stolen kiss in the shadows of the citadel, the man who had whispered his fears into the night. "I hope so," I replied, my hand tightening around the core, "for both of us." He placed a hand on my shoulder, the contact sending a jolt of electricity through me. "If you ever need a way back, you know where to find me," he said, his eyes reflecting the distant stars. I nodded, feeling the weight of the universe settle on my shoulders. The doors hissed open, and a shuttle waited, its engines humming with anticipation. As I stepped onto the ramp, I turned one last time. Kael stood there, his silhouette framed by the emergency lights, his pulse rifle lowered, his gaze unwavering. "Good luck, Elara," he called, his voice carrying across the metal expanse. "Good luck," I echoed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. The shuttle lifted off, the citadel shrinking behind me, a beacon of steel and fire against the endless night. I felt the data core's pulse sync with my own, a rhythm that promised change. Months later, the Resistance on Vesper 9 had used the core to ignite a new energy grid, powering cities that had once lived in darkness. The war that had threatened to consume the outer colonies began to wane, and whispers of a fragile peace spread across the stars. I received a transmission one evening, the holographic image flickering in my quarters. Kael's face filled the screen, his storm-dark hair still catching the light, his steel-gray eyes softer than I had ever seen. "We did it," he said, a smile playing on his lips. "The galaxy may never know the role we played, but the stars will remember the light we sparked." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, the memory of that first encounter flooding back. "And what about us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He leaned closer to the camera, his breath warm against the lens. "We are the same storm," he replied. "We will meet again when the universe is ready for us to write our own story." The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the hum of the station's life support and the distant echo of a promise. I closed my eyes, feeling the pulse of the data core still resonating within me, a reminder that love, like war, could be both destructive and transformative. The stars outside my window glittered, each one a possibility, each one a reminder that the universe was vast enough for both conflict and compassion. And somewhere far beyond the reach of any empire, a commander and a smuggler turned spy would find each other again, their destinies intertwined like the constellations that guided them. The universe held its breath, waiting for the next chapter of our story, a tale of fire and ice, of steel and softness, of a love that could survive the coldest void in the hottest battle. Now, as I stand on the balcony of the newly rebuilt citadel, the wind carrying the scent of ionized sea and distant nebulae, I hear the faint echo of Kael's voice in my mind. The green reticle that once hovered over my chest is gone, replaced by a new kind of targeting, one that aims not at destruction, but at hope. I turn my head, feeling the weight of the crystal still in my pocket, a reminder of the pact we made. The stars above shine brighter than ever, each one a promise that the future is ours to shape. And as the night deepens, I whisper to the cosmos, we are more than the roles they gave us. We are the storm, the calm, the love that defies the stars. The universe listens, and in its silence, I hear the soft, steady beat of a pulse rifle being lowered, the gentle hum of a heart that refuses to be silenced. The story continues, not in the pages of a dossier, but in the breath between two souls who dared to look beyond the reticle and see each other.